Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a lovely town in Germany. It was called Hamelin. It sat beside a big, wide river, the Weser. The houses in Hamelin were tall and pretty, with pointed roofs and colorful shutters. The streets were made of cobblestones that twisted and turned like ribbons. In the center of the town there was a big church with a tall steeple that reached for the sky. The people of Hamelin were proud of their town. They worked hard, baked sweet cakes, and told stories to their children as the sun went down. It was, for the most part, a very happy place to live. But something was terribly wrong in Hamelin. The town had a secret, a dark and wriggling problem. It was rats. Not just one or two rats, but thousands. Millions, it seemed. They were everywhere. They scurried through the kitchens and nibbled on the cheese. They danced in the attics and slept in the cupboards. They were bold and they were clever. There were big rats, small rats, brown rats, gray rats. They stole the bread from the baker's tables and the grain from the farmer's sacks. The cats were too scared to chase them, and the dogs just watched them go by. The people of Hamelin did not know what to do. They set traps, but the rats were too smart. They brought in more cats, but the rats simply chased the cats away. The noise of the rats was constant, a scratching sound, a squeaking sound that filled every house day and night. The mayor of Hamelin, a very important man with a big belly and a gold chain, sat in the town hall with his council. They argued and they shouted, they wrung their hands and pulled at their beards. But no matter how much they talked, the rats just grew fatter and bolder, until it felt like the rats, not the people, were the true owners of the town. One day when the sun was high and the town's despair was at its deepest, a stranger walked into Hamelin. He was a very strange sight indeed. He was tall and thin like a shadow stretched long. He wore a peculiar coat with patches of bright red silk and patches of sunny yellow silk. It was a coat of 100 colors and it shimmered as he moved. On his head a tall pointed hat with a long feather tucked into its band. His face was hard to read, with eyes that seemed to see right through you, and a smile that never quite reached them. He carried nothing with him but a simple, long pipe made of wood. The stranger walked straight to the town hall, his steps quiet on the noisy, rat-filled streets. He did not seem bothered by the creatures scurrying around his feet. He entered the great hall where the mayor and his council were arguing as they always were. The stranger stood before them, and a silence fell over the room. The only sound was the distant squeaking of the rats.
I am a piper. I'm also a rat catcher. I have heard you have a problem and I have heard you offer a reward. I can help you.
The mayor looked at the strange man in his funny coat. He looked at the simple pipe in his hand. He did not believe this man could do what so many others had failed to do. But he was a desperate man, and the town was desperate with him.
You think you can rid us of our plague with a little pipe? It is impossible.
The piper simply smiled that thin smile again.
For 1,000 gold coins, I will lead every rat from your town. Not one will remain. Do we have a deal?
Yes, 1,000 gold coins we promise. If you can rid us of every single rat, the gold is yours. We give you our word.
The piper stood in the very heart of Hamelin. The townspeople watched from their windows, curious and doubtful. He slowly raised the long wooden pipe to his lips. He took a deep breath, and then he began to play. It was not a loud sound, not at first. It was a soft, strange music, a tune that no one had ever heard before. It was a sweet and high and piercing melody that seemed to weave itself into the very air. The notes danced and twisted, whispering secrets that only certain ears could understand. It was a magic song, and it began to work its magic immediately. First, there was a rustling, then a squeak, then another. A big brown rat poked its head out of a drain pipe. A little gray rat scurried from a baker's cellar. They came out of the houses, out of the shops, out of the churches. They poured into the streets, their eyes glazed over, their whiskers twitching. The music called to them, a promise of something wonderful, something they could not resist. The piper did not stop playing. He began to walk, his colorful coat swaying behind him, and as he walked, the rats followed. It was a river of rats, a great gray, writhing sea of fur and tails. They tumbled over one another, all pushing forward, their eyes fixed on the piper. They forgot the cheese in the pantries and the grain in the barns. All they wanted was to follow that enchanting sound. The people of Hamelin watched in disbelief and amazement. Their greatest problem, their darkest nightmare, was being led away by a man with a simple pipe. The piper walked slowly, surely, through every street and every alley of Hamelin. He made sure his music reached every corner, every hidden nest. The river of rats grew larger and larger, a monstrous parade behind the lone musician. He led them down the main street, past the town hall, and toward the wide, flowing river Weser at the edge of town. He walked right to the water's edge, and without stopping his song, he waded in. And the rats, hypnotized by the magic melody, followed him. They plunged into the deep, cold water, and one by one, the river carried them all away, until not a single rat was left alive in Hamelin. When the last rat had been swept away by the river, the piper stopped his music. Silence fell over Hamelin. They threw open their windows and cheered. They ran into the streets and hugged each other. They danced and sang, celebrating their freedom. The town was clean. The food was safe. The babies could sleep peacefully. The piper had done it. He had performed a miracle. He walked back to the town hall, his colorful coat now damp from the river, to collect his promised reward.
I have done as I promised.
Every rat is gone from your town. Now, I have come for my payment. 1,000 gold coins. But something had changed in the town hall. The mayor was no longer desperate. He was smug. He looked at his council members and they looked back at him, their faces greedy. They saw the strange piper, a lonely traveler with no one to defend him. They saw the 1,000 gold coins, a treasure they did not want to part with.
1,000 gold coins? That is far too much for a simple bit of whistling.
The mayor and his council began to argue that the price was too high. They thought now that the danger was gone, they did not need to keep their promise. They believed they were cleverer than the piper. They had tricked him into doing the work for them. The mayor reached into a small purse and pulled out a few silver coins. He tossed them onto the table where they clinked with a cheap sound.
Here, take 50 coins and be on your way. It is more than enough for a tune.
Now leave our town.
The piper looked at the small pile of silver.
A promise is a promise. You made a deal with me. You will regret breaking it. I know another tune, you see.
The piper turned his back on the dishonest mayor and his council. He walked out of the town hall and back into the center of the town square. The people were still celebrating. It was a Sunday morning, and everyone was dressed in their finest clothes for church. The children, free from the fear of rats, were playing games in the streets. They were laughing and chasing each other, their faces bright with happiness. There were 130 children in all, the sons and daughters of the people of Hamelin. They were the town's greatest treasure. The piper stood in the square just as he had before, but this time when he raised the pipe to his lips, he played a very different song. It was not the strange, piercing melody he had played for the rats. This tune was soft and wondrously sweet. It sounded like birdsong and candy, like secret whispers and forgotten lullabies. It was the most beautiful music the children had ever heard. It promised games and adventures, fields of flowers and rivers of lemonade. It was a magic song made just for them, a call they could not possibly ignore. As the music drifted through the air, the children stopped their games. They turned their heads, their eyes wide with wonder. A little girl in a blue dress stopped chasing her ball. A small boy who was playing marbles dropped them, and they rolled away, forgotten. One by one they began to walk towards the piper. Their parents were busy talking and celebrating, and at first they did not notice. They did not hear the piper's new song. It was a tune meant only for the ears of the young and the innocent. The children gathered around the piper, their faces upturned and smiling. The piper began to walk, just as he had before, and just as the rats had done, the children followed him. He led them down the main street, a happy, skipping parade of little boys and girls. They followed his bright red and yellow coat, mesmerized by the magical music that filled their ears. Some of the townspeople finally looked up and saw the strange procession. They cried out in alarm. They called their children's names, but the children did not hear them. They could only hear the piper's sweet enchanted tune, and they followed him without a single look back. The piper led the 130 children out of the town gates and toward the hills that stood outside Hamelin. The parents, now frantic with fear, ran after them. They screamed for their children to come back, their voices filled with panic and regret, but it was too late. The children were under the music's spell, and they did not stop their happy march. The piper led them straight towards a large hill known as Copenhill. As he reached the base of the great green slope, a strange thing happened. A door, a magical doorway, opened wide in the side of the hill itself. The piper walked right through the opening, still playing his pipe, and the children followed him inside. One after another they vanished into the darkness of the hill. The parents could only watch in horror, helpless, as their beloved children were swallowed by the earth. Then, just as the last child had stepped through, the magical door swung shut. It closed with a deep, rumbling sound, and then it was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. The hillside was solid rock and earth once more. The music stopped, and a terrible, heartbreaking silence fell. All of the children were gone, all except for one. A little boy, who was lame and used a crutch, had not been able to keep up with the others. He arrived at the hill just as the door was closing, and he was left behind. He was heartbroken, not because he was saved, but because he had missed the wonderful things the music had promised. Through his tears, he told the weeping parents about the beautiful land the piper's song had described, a place of endless play and happiness. This only made their sorrow deeper. They had lost their children, all for the sake of 1,000 gold coins. The town of Hamelin was never the same again. It was quiet now, far too quiet. There was no laughter, there were no games, there were no small footsteps running on the cobblestones. The people searched for their children for years, sending messengers to lands far and wide, but no trace of the piper or the 130 children was ever found. They carved the story into the stone of the town hall. They wrote it in their town records, so that no one would ever forget the terrible price they paid for a broken promise. The street the children last walked down was named the Street Without Drums, and no music was ever allowed to be played there again. The story of the Pied Piper of Hamelin is a very old and very sad tale. It has been told for hundreds of years, whispered from parents to children, a warning that travels on the wind. It reminds us of a town that was once happy but became greedy. The people of Hamelin had a very big problem, and a stranger came and fixed it for them. He did exactly what he said he would do. He saved their town from the crawling, creeping darkness of the rats. All he asked for in return was what he had been promised. But the mayor and the people, in their moment of relief, decided their promise was not important. This is the heart of the story's lesson, a truth as simple and as serious as a heartbeat. A promise is a sacred thing. When you give your word to someone, you are giving them a piece of your honor. It is a bond, a trust that should never be broken. The mayor of Hamelin thought he was being clever by cheating the piper. He thought he was saving money. But what he really did was show that his word meant nothing. He showed that he was dishonest, and his dishonesty brought a sorrow upon his town that was 1,000 times worse than the plague of rats. The story also teaches us to pay our debts. When someone helps you, when they do a service for you, it is right and fair to give them what they have earned. The piper deserved his reward. He had worked his magic and fulfilled his part of the deal. To refuse to pay him was not just greedy, it was deeply unfair. It was an act of disrespect that angered the piper and led to the terrible consequence. It is a reminder that every action has a reaction, and treating others unfairly can bring about the greatest sadness. Cheating someone is never a victory. It is planting a seed for future sorrow. So when you hear the wind whistle around the corners of old buildings, perhaps you can imagine it carries a faint, sad tune. It is the memory of the piper's song and the lost children of Hamelin. The story lives on to teach us a simple, vital lesson that everyone, young and old, should remember. Always be fair, always be honest, always keep your promises. For a promise is easy to make, but once it is broken, the cost of mending it can be more than anyone can ever imagine paying. It is a price that, like the children of Hamelin, can be lost forever.